Welcome to Lesson 7 in the ASP.NET MVC UI add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to tackle creating the prize form as well as the list of prizes available to us. Now, this is actually one we're going to run into a snag, and that's a good thing, I think, because I think it'll stretch our thinking process and really make us figure out how to overcome a minor obstacle. So let's jump right in and look at the prizes form over here. So I'm opening up and we have the create prize form. That's wonderful. We've got this simple form. It's got 4 input boxes, no big deal. We create the prize. Now let's look at the create tournament form. And let's look at what happens. We click the create prize button. It opens up that form and immediately puts it in the list box when we create the prize. There is no drop down to select an existing prize, which is probably an oversight on our part. We could probably anticipate that people will reuse certain prizes. Say, the winner gets 50% of the pot. But what that means is that we don't have any mechanism to list our prizes. So before, when we create these other pages, for example, the people controller or the teams controller, we have both that list so we can see them and also the ability to create a new one. And that list also helps us when, for example, in teams, we had that list of people show up, so we have a checkbox list to say, I want these people on this particular team. Well, if we don't have that list and it's not in our class library, what do? And so the answer really simply is we have to update our class library. And I said at the beginning of this series that we're going to try to avoid that whenever possible. And we are. But whenever we make a change, we want it to be an additive change. Meaning we're not going to say we're removing a feature. We're not going to say that we're going to change how a feature works. Instead, we'll add new features. That way, the WinForm UI will still work because it doesn't have to use the new features. They're just available to them now if it ever wanted to use them. So the first thing we're going to do in this whole setup is figure out how to add a list of all prizes. So the place to go for that is our class library. That's right here, the tracker library. Let's go to data access and look at iData connection. Because don't forget we have 2 different places for data access. One for SQL, one for text files. And they are different. So we have a list of team, list of person, list of tournament, but no list of prizes. So how do we get that list of prizes? Well, let's look at the tournament where it loads a tournament because the tournament has a list of prizes in it because the prizes that are related to that tournament. So I click on my references. I'll go to the SQL connector first. And inside get tournament _all, for 2016. It's 17.1, whatever that is. I believe it's 2016. This is the developer edition. I'm fairly certain. And the developer edition is free. So if you wanted to just Google SQL Server Developer Edition and Microsoft's site will have a download for it. So in here, in tournaments, we have store procedures under programmability. So programmability, store procedures, And then here's our list of store procedures. And we even have one SP prizes get by tournament. Now right click and say modify. And this is our prizes list where it gets all the prizes, but it limits it by the tournament ID. This is only giving the prizes associated with a particular tournament. Now, the same prize can be in multiple tournaments. The WinForms app didn't have a way of doing that, hooking those up, but the database will permit it. Therefore, there's no problem with us allowing the prizes to be listed and selected multiple times in multiple different tournaments. So we need to essentially copy this. So let's actually modify this. We'll say create. If I can put my fingers on the right keys. Create procedure. Now it's going to yell at me because the name is the same. I always change this first. If I'm going from an alter statement, I always change it first because that way I have to change the name, otherwise it won't work. If I were to leave the alter there and make the modifications and accidentally hit F5 to run this, it would alter the existing store procedure, and that's a problem. I don't want to wipe out the changes that I already have, or the code I already have in this store procedure. So I'm going to create a new one, and I will say instead of get by tournament, I'll say get all, which follows our convention. And then really, I can drop this entirely. I don't need to link to the tournament prizes in order to get the tournament ID matched up. I don't even need the alias. I can put my semicolon there, and I don't need the input parameter. So that's all there is. It really is just select star from dbo.prizes. And that, let's execute this. That's our new store procedure. We refresh the list, and now in the list we have SP prizes underscore get all, as well as get by tournament. And that's all the SQL there is to enabling this change. Next, let's take this code, and I'll actually grab all the way through the using statement. So I'm actually going to break this a little bit because I don't have 1, 2 closing curly. Is go to, I believe it's the edit menu, advanced, format document, or control ED. You click that and notice it fixed it for me. If you do that and things don't line up all pretty, that means you're missing a curly brace or a paren or a square bracket or something like that where it's confused as to what's going on. So that's an easy way to tell if something's going on. Go to advanced under the edit menu, format document. Now, this right now is broken, and that's okay. We're going to trim it out to the correct way of doing things. So the first thing you want to do is create our output. So list of prize model output. And we'll leave it like that for now. We don't need to initialize it. Normally I would, but because we're doing this call here, we don't need to initialize it. So let's paste that in there, and let's pull this out here. So we have right here is output equals connection.query, and I want to return a set of prize model, but this isn't the right store procedure. So let's change this to prizes, get all. And that's really all there is to it. We're not passing any parameters in. We're just saying, give me all of the prizes. And in fact, if you look up here, that's really similar to the get all persons. We're just doing this one call. We're saying, give me a list of type person model, and at the very end, we're returning the output. In this case, we have not yet returned output. So there we go. Now we've returned output, just like we do up here with the get person underscore all. All right, so now we have this get prize underscore all in our SQL connector, but don't forget we have our text connector. Let's go back to get tournaments underscore all, and let's look at the text connector. And here is where in the file we are implementing that get tournaments underscore all. Let's actually create a method. I'll leave this tab open. So let's go back over to our SQL connector and grab this format. Now, none of the code is what we'll use. So we'll delete the code out. But I want to have this format. So I go ahead and paste this in and delete all but all this code. So there we go. So now we have our same method in here, because don't forget, we're going to put this method into our interface. But first, I want to populate all the information on both the text side as well as the SQL side. And the SQL side's done. SQL side was really simple. It was just give me all the prizes. The text side, we have to track down where we get all the prizes to see if we can do a similar copy and paste. So in the get tournament underscore all, we have global config.tournament file full file path load file convert to tournament models. Now, this is where good naming comes in really handy, because I can read this, and it's been a few months, I think, since I last really played with this. So in that time, I've done a ton of code, and I forget half of what I did here. But I can read through and say, okay, what does this method do? It loads the full file path. What does this do? It loads the actual file. What does this do? Takes that file and converts it. So where do I look for the prize information? Inside the converter. So I hit F12 here, and it takes me here. And it says, okay, here's a converter. And if you notice, right here, so I copy that, go back to text connector. I paste that in, and I'll just say, instead of this, I'll say output. And that's it. So now we have a get prizes underscore all that pulls all the prizes and returns them on the text connector side. The last thing we need to do is take this part of the signature, not the public. We need to copy it and take it over to our interface. We paste it in, put a semicolon at the end. the method call for it. But let's go back over to our views. We can right click and say add controller. Oops, not my views, my controllers. I'm sure some of you will yell at me. Okay, controllers, right click, add controller. We start with our controller, not our views. So I want an MVC5 controller with read-write actions. I'm still on the fence about doing a blank controller and then just adding those in, but I'm thinking that, you know what, let's do it this time just so you can see it and see the differences. And it really is up to you whether you want to add things to something or delete things. I usually find it's easier to delete things, but I'm thinking what I'm going to do here, I know I'm going to do, but I'm thinking what might work is to actually copy from the people controller, because all the names will be the same. The create method, the create post method, and all the rest. And I just need to change over to be prizes instead of people. So let's try that out. So I hit add, and we're going to call this the prizes controller. And that scaffolds out. It actually creates an index action for us, which in some ways, if you're thinking it's a blank controller, it's a bit frustrating because it's not a blank controller. But what I was really trying to do is avoid the Now, first of all, the comments are even wrong. So let's change that to be prizes, not people. And then we need to add our control dots to add the using statements. And we need to also change these person models over to be prize model. So prize model. And then down here, prize model. And down here, we need to have this be create prize. So we don't have a whole lot of copy and paste, which is nice. I don't like and I don't advocate copying and pasting hardly at all inside of code. But in a case like this, it's pretty safe as long as you're very careful to look at every line. Because if you miss one thing, it might not have a red squiggly on it. And so you might accidentally do something weird or unexpected. And that's never a good thing when it comes to applications. Weird and unexpected, you don't want. So let's change this here to be get prizes underscore all. And that should be it. I changed my comments, I changed my models, and I need to change this available people to all prizes, because it does not make sense to say available people. And that's one of those things that, again, it wouldn't have caused any real problems, except it confuses the next guy that comes along. So make sure that you, again, review every single thing before you move on. So again, I'm not a huge fan of copying and pasting. For that reason, it's very easy to miss something, even something small. But it does create a nice bonus for us here. Now, we've done this already a couple times, so let's do it again. We create our views for these three, actually two actions. The third action is the post action. So right click, say add view, call index, and this is a list, And our model is the prize model. We leave the rest alone. We hit add. There we go. Now this might pop up sometimes. Based on your project, we've identified extensions that you may find helpful. That's Visual Studio trying to make your life a little easier. And you really can't complain about that. So we can view extensions while we're here. The Bootstrap snippet pack, this is kind of nice. What it does is in the IntelliSense, it will show you some more information about Bootstrap. The only problem is I've seen some bugs with it where people are like, it caused problems where it crashed my Visual Studio. So it's a nice feature if it works, but just be careful, because if you start having squirrely problems with Visual Studio, you might want to look at, do I need to uninstall that? Now, the glyph friend is even nicer, I think, because I don't see as many problems as far as people reporting issues. Now, one step back from it. If you see people reporting issues, don't immediately say it's the library's fault. People don't typically report, yeah, I like it. That's almost never the case. They're either, I'm an enthusiastic raving fan and I post, or something went wrong. And it's not even necessarily that it went wrong with that particular add-on. It may be that that add-on in conjunction with the 131 they also have installed caused a problem. So take what you see with a grain of salt. Don't just assume because a library has a few negative reviews that it's necessarily a bad thing. But just know going in to be cautious. The glyph friend doesn't have as many negative reviews, but the nice thing about this library is that it shows you in the IntelliSense not only the information about the different glyphs, the different icons like the font awesome icons and all the rest, it also shows you the actual icon. And that's kind of nice instead of going to, for example, I use font awesome a lot with my development work for my company. So I actually go to Font Awesome's webpage and open up the icon list and just have it open another tab. Because, I'm thinking, I want, this particular item or icon or something like this, and I'll go through and browse. So that is a nice option. I'm not a huge fan, though, of third-party add-ons, especially not when I'm teaching. And the reason why is because I don't want you to say, well, my Visual Studio doesn't have that. How do I get that? And I have to tell you, well, install these 30 add-ons. So I typically won't install these, but if you find they're useful and make your life a little easier, definitely by all means, go for it. So just a little rabbit trail there since that popped up, and I'll close this out. In fact, I'll say don't show again. All right. So now we've got our page for the listing of the prize model. Now let's actually change the index to say view all prizes. And we have a create new, and we'll take out this last th because we know that is for the edit, details, and delete, which we're not going to do. So now we have all the headers and we have all the values down here. Now immediately the first thing I think of is display name for. That's messed up. We know that. We haven't yet changed the metadata to have a more user-friendly display name. So we'll get to that in a little bit. But next, let's create our create view. It's a create template. It's the prizes model. Or prize model, sorry. Now the one thing I failed to do the last time we created the team control or the team create page is I didn't check this reference script libraries checkbox. So the reference script libraries checkbox simply adds that jQuery validate bundle, which we want because we want to validate our form. So let's add that for our create page. We don't need it for our list page. And now we can say, let's change this to create a new prize. We have the anti-forgery token already installed. Down at the very bottom, we have that jQuery validation in place. So really, in this form, life is good. The only thing we need to do is let's take this out. I don't see a need to say prize model at the top. We did for the other two, but it's ugly. Let's run it to show what it's like if it's not there. All right, it's going to recompile, which takes a bit the first time, but after that, it's pretty quick. So there you go. It just drops it right in, create a new prize, and then here's the information. So it really is unnecessary, I think, to have that prize model and then a horizontal rule. So we're not going to include that. Now, also note that this text box right here, if I try and put information in, it only accepts E. That's because it's actually a number text box. And it's got a little picker next to it. So that's because when we said the editor for, it said, hey, that's a number. So since it's this kind of number, we can do this kind of box. All right. Now let's add our decorators to the class, and then we should be good. So let's come down to our tracker library, go to models. Let's pull up the person model. So we have a copy of, we can copy from, just to give us a sample to start from. Then go to the prize model and say, okay, int isn't displayed, but place number is. Now place number is an int. Okay, we need to do a control dot first. And the using system.componentModel.data annotations. So obviously it's not given name. So we'll say this is the place number. Now it's also not a string, therefore that's not relevant, but it is required. Now the question is, do we want to allow any number we want? For example, is -1 okay for a place number? Well, the answer is probably no. Let's change this to say we have to have a range, and that range is, here's the minimum. Minimum is place 1, because that's first place, and we have to have a maximum. Well, for a place, I don't think we should get larger than 100 places. The reality is, I believe that it gets a little squirrely after the second place we talked about. So in theory, you could put, well, range is 1 to 2, meaning you can have 1, you can have 2, but that's it. Now, let's move on to place name. Place name is just like the given name we had used for our example. So let's just say place name. That's where it says, the typed out first place, FIRST space PLACE. That's where we type it out. So string length 100, min length of 2 is probably too short. Let's just say 3. That way, just in case they said 1ST. It's not great, but it is possible they want to use that. Now, the next two are kind of tricky. The prize amount and the prize percentage. And here's why. Not both of these are required. So we can't say that either one's required, because if this one's required, we don't need this one. And if this one's used, we don't need this one. So we really can't do that. We can't say required. And they're numbers, and it'll lock them into just the numbers. But that's really all the validation we have. So we're just going to use the display name. And that's it. And that's okay. We can change this to prize percentage. Now there are other options we can add to this. For example, we could do something like this where we said, let's do a square bracket, not an angled. And we said data type limitation on the field type or requiring it or not, and all the rest. You can look into Microsoft documentation on this, which is actually pretty good. And you just search for ASP.NET validation. And it will take you to a page that has a lot of information about how to apply different validation to your model. But for now, I think this is good validation. It gives us all we need. So we can hit save and close this out. And in fact, now we should be able to complete the entire process of seeing all of our prizes and creating new prizes. So let's try it out and make sure it works. Let's go back to the list first. And yes, indeed, we do have a list of prizes. Now notice, because I said this is of data type currency, it added the US-based currency for this. So the dollar sign and then the decimal point before the percentage or the fraction of a dollar. Now, if you are in Europe or other countries, I believe this will change based upon your localization. So if your browser says that you're in Europe, it might have the euro symbol, and it might have a comma here instead of the decimal point. So it really does depend on where you're at, and localization is a whole nother topic for C#. There's an awful lot that can be done to allow your application to change based upon the native countries that are using it. So you can say, well, if I'm in Europe, it just changes automatically, and it says, okay, here's all the things that change. Whereas if I'm in the US, this is all the things that change. The same is true for even your titles, where you can localize these titles so that you might have, if your browser's native language is English, it says this. Whereas if your browser's native language is French, it says something different. So that's all possible. We're not going to cover that in this video, but I do believe that in the near future, we'll be looking at some localization things to kind of help you guys out. So that's looking good. Let's create a new one. And let's go back to our list for a minute just to make sure we have first, second, fourth, almost bronze, winner, 10th place, first, second, first, second. So let's create a new one and call this the third. Whoops. I can't even type in here because it says, nope, that's the place number. I'm going to say 3. And the place name will be third best. The prize amount will be 55. No prize percentage. And I say create. Now the interesting thing here is when I click create, it says the prize percentage field is required. But I'm fairly certain we didn't require it. So let's move this out of the way for now, and let's go back over to the prizes controller. Oops, not the controller. We want to come down here. It moved my list. We want to come to the prize model. And the prize percentage does not say required. Again, this is a debugging thing. So let's figure out why. Let's try putting a 0 in there, and it goes away. So I think the issue here is that, yes, this is a text box, but it's saying, no, I really need to have a number in here, and an empty string is not a number. And so it's saying, well, then we need to have you put a 0 there. So that's not ideal, and we'll look at how we can modify that but for now we'll leave that alone. So prize percentage, put a 0, we hit create, and now at the bottom we have third best, $55, 0 for the percentage. So let's see if we can't fix that issue of the 0 not being in the box. And the first thing I want to try is going to create and coming down here and modifying these two editor fors for the prize amount and the prize percentage. So let's say comma at value, capital V, equals 0. And we'll do the same thing down here and just see if this works. This is one of those possible solutions to this problem. All right, so we hit start, and we'll see if right off the bat if there's a 0 in that field, and there is. And that's great. Now, probably the longer term solution would be go to the prize model and change these two to say equals 0 and equals 0. The only downside of that right now, and this is that, I'm sorry, not place name, but prize amount and prize percentage. So the only downside of that is that it will affect the current UI, the WinForm application. And I'm not positive that it will be a non-breaking change because it is a change, not an addition. And I know that seems like a fine line. We're adding something, but really what we're doing is we're changing the initial value of that field. And it may be okay, but I really want to test that before I put it in place. And we're really trying hard not to change our class library. So I'm going to put it in the view. Now, that's not necessarily the greatest place to be modifying how your code works. You really want your view to just be about display. Otherwise, you're mixing up your view and your data logic and even your data access possibly. And you don't want to crunch all those together. You want to keep those separate as much as possible for ease of use and for ease of modification later. So this is not necessarily the ideal solution, but it is a solution that I know that won't affect the other user interface. And so I think this is the better solution for our specific case. Now, we have a controller that works. We have a create page that works. We've modified that model so that it has some attributes to show up properly. We even have a list now, which is something new that we didn't have before. And the last thing we're going to do is go down to, and it really should be the first thing we do. I just forget about it. Go to layout page and add the prizes. All right, so now we hit play again just to see it. And this should be the last thing we need to do for this lesson. We can hit prizes. Yes, they display. Even the new one, we can go and hit create new. If we wanted to, we could create a new one. And if we hit create right now, it says, nope, can't do that. We go back to our list and go on from there. So everything works. It works the way you want it to. It displays all the information you want it to. And the job is complete, which that's actually pretty easy. We had to make some modifications, but nothing really major. We had to add that list of prizes, but that really was almost already in place. We just had to make a few minor modifications to tweak it to show the way you want it to. So with that, this lesson is complete. In our next lesson, we're going to jump into actually creating new tournaments. So stay tuned for that.